just going to go through a few random things that talk about the white race being the Israelites and the people of the Bible. I find it incredibly interesting. So here is a snippet from the website below, and it says Mr. Wilson, who is Alan Wilson. I posted some other videos of him talking, states that the known recorded history of Britain starts in and around 1500 to 1350 BC, possibly earlier, with large scale migrations into Europe and Britain from ancient Mesopotamia, corresponding to modern day Iraq and Kuwait, northeastern Syria, and parts of Turkey and Iran, and a later mass migration from around 500 BC of those descended from both the lost tribes of Israel and those descended from the besieged city of Troy in what is now Western Turkey. These are believed to have traveled to Britain via northern Italy and the European continent. To add to this, Welsh history, such as that found in the Chronicle of the Early Britons, uh, Tassilo Chronicles, clearly states that Brutus of Troy and his vast army landed in Britain from around 1170 BC and became the first known king of the Britons, starting what is the true royal Brythonic dynasty of Britain. The original lost 10 tribes, up to 2 million strong, never got lost. They cultivated the European continent, giving birth to European civilization using Britain as their base and going on to inhabit North America, Canada, Argentina, Australia, and New Zealand in large numbers in recent centuries, and even in my note, ancient centuries. The other half sailed to the nearby island of Lemnos and, along with a number of the Cymric speaking Trojans, then set sail for Britain, where they joined the existing Cymric tribes. A major Colburn inscribed stone was found on the island of Lemnos in 1876, which describes the fleets gathering there to sail the Cymry people to the great green island out in the western ocean of the Atlantic, Britain. To the left, that's from a book from 1852 titled Letters from the Welsh Triads. And it says, this perhaps would not be the most proper opportunity, even if the space allowed of it, to discuss the manner in which the earth was first peopled upon the dispersion of the Noah, Shaddai, or immediate descendants of Noah. But it may be briefly premised with reference to some of the following notices that the colonization of Europe, which necessarily took its rise in the East, made its progress always and naturally along the course of large rivers. Thus, the western coast of Europe was first peopled by those wandering tribes who found their way along the banks of the Elbe, the Rhine, and the Loire. So, yeah, it's referring to the tribes of Israel. So, who were the white race? And the Phoenicians, who all traveled by, well, I guess all the ancient peoples did, right? Romans, Greeks. So, that's why even in America, you find, or there has been found a lot of Roman, Greek, and apparently Welsh artifacts going back, 500 or not 500, 1,000 or 1,500 years ago. How could that be if the Indians were here first? Because they weren't. On the right is a guy named James Michael, I think it was from Kentucky, and he was speaking about the proof that the Welsh were in North America 900 years before Columbus, and it links them back to the lost tribes. So he said, there's a Celtic cross. If you look closely, it's got a circle around the cross, but more importantly, it's got the three chevrons of the kings of Glamorgan. And that was part of their shield. It goes all the way back in the Bible and is one of the 12 tribes. And then either he or Alan Wilson said later on, and sorry for the poor quality picture there, but says, but when we looked at the family crest of all the kings of Britain, they are all of the 12 tribes. And they're not Jews, they're white, it's the white race, are the 12 tribes. The Declaration of Arbroath from 1320, it says, there in the middle, it says they journeyed, right? The ancestors of the Scots journeyed from Greater Scythia by way of the Taharian Sea and the Pillars of Hercules, and dwelt for a long course of time in Iberia, Spain, among the most savage tribes, but nowhere could they be subdued by any race, however barbarous. So the Assyrians themselves were Semitic, white, and in 2 Kings 17 it states the tribes of Israel were carried away to Assyria, which is where Scythia was, and they then traveled into Europe. So it all kind of connects. Here's an interesting, I mean, I don't remember the name of this book, but it states in 1671, a pamphlet was issued in Nether Dutch setting forth that English speaking people were Israel, or my note, part of Israel, because so were all the Germanic and Slavs. I mean, all the whites were all connected. It says in 1762 was translated in English. And I guess there is the translation part of it. And it says, amongst the political religious sects that fought under Cromwell were the levelers. A prominent leveler was one Everhard. On one occasion, he had to make a discourse before the protector. He began by saying, quote, that he belonged to the race of the Jews. Now, note that the modern publisher of this points out that should say Judeans, not Jews, as the Anglo-Saxons are called. So I'll read that again, that he belonged to the race of the Judeans as the Anglo-Saxons are called. In this regard, it will be of interest to note that in an old work, the Vetus Chronicum Holstein, it is reported that the Jutes were, again, Judeans, that they spoke Hebrew, and that the Angles and Saxons were kindred tribes. I'm reading a couple of passages from the book Uncovering the Mysteries of Your Hidden Inheritance. And it says, the Babylonians called the Scythians Gimera, or Gimere. The Romans called them Chimere, and the Greeks called them Chimeroi, or Kimbroi. All of these names translate into English as Sumerian, Cimbri, and Kimmery. Cymry, there you go. Cymry. And Cymry is what Alan Wilson and Blackett talk about. Yeah, so the Assyrians and Babylonians also called the Israelites Sak Galutha or Bit Cymry. Huh, see? Another link. Galutha was the Babylonian word for captive, in Hebrew, Galath. Bit Cymry, the Assyrian counterpart of the Hebrew Beth Omri, means house of Omri. Omri was the famous Israelite king who founded the northern capital of Samaria. The Davis Dictionary of the Bible in 1973 records Omri made an impression on history outside of Israel. Not only did the Moabites remember his name, but after his death and the annihilation of his family, the Assyrians for a time still attached his name, which they wrote Humri, to the reigning monarch of the land of Israel. And under that, it says some translations render Humri as Cymri. The KH indicates that the sound is guttural, similar to the CH in Scots, lock, lake, or in German, milk, milch, milk. The Reverend W.H. Poole records in Anglo-Israel or the Saxon Race, 1879, that the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Old Testament, clearly revealed the identity of the Israelites. The Israelites were called Cymri soon after they were taken from their own land. I'm going to read number 29 down there in the footnotes. It says, Gimri means tribes. The Israelites and Germanic peoples were pretty much the only people who were known to have such a multitude of homogeneous subtribes. Strabo, the Greek geographer, historian, stated most of the Scythians beginning from the Caspian Sea are called Dehe Scythae, and those situated more towards the east, Mascate and Sethe. The rest have the common name of Scythians, but each tribe had its own peculiar name. Anyway, moving to the right, evidence shows that Christ himself founded the early church in Britain during the years between his early childhood and his recorded biblical ministry, the period about which the biblical record is silent. In my note, if you listen to Alan Wilson's speeches, I think he goes into this. I don't know if he may have more on this, I'm not sure, but Anyway, greater evidence exists that Joseph of Arimathea, a handful of the disciples, Mary, the mother of Christ, and others migrated to Britain and strengthened the church. St. Andrew became the bishop and patron saint of Scotland. The Apostle Paul, in his missionary journeys, traveled to Britain. There are dozens of well documented books on this topic. One of the best is The Drama of the Lost Disciples. A few historical proofs are listed below. St. Augustine wrote, in the western confines of Britain, there is a certain royal island of large extent, surrounded by water, abounding in all the beauties of nature and necessities of life. In it, the first neophytes of Catholic universal law go beforehand acquainting them. Founded a church constructed by no human art, but by the hands of Christ himself, for the salvation of his people. Say I cut some of this off. Gildas Albanicus, the wise, a British historian, wrote, Christ, the true Son, afforded his light and the knowledge of his precepts to our island, the last year of Tiberius Caesar. Eusebius wrote, the apostle Paul passed beyond the ocean to the isles called the Britannic Isles. William of Malmesbury stated, or wrote, was asked by the monks of Glastonbury to write their history. He recorded that after Christ's crucifixion and resurrection, Joseph of Arimathea arrived with 11 missionaries from the Holy Land. The kings gave them 12 hides of land. Caswell's History of England states, Druidical rites and ceremonies were almost identical with Mosaic ritual. Also, the chief, arch-druid, and the Israelite high priest were similarly arrayed, even to the breastplate of judgment and the 12 stones representing the tribes of Israel, and the holy name Yahweh on the headgear. Charles Hubert, in his Religions of Britain, writes, so near is the resemblance between the Druidical religion in Britain and the patriarchal religion of the Hebrews that we would hesitate not to pronounce their origin the same. So, yeah, I mean, if Christ and Paul and obviously their families went to Britain, right, and Christ was only there for his sheep, his people, obviously they're not going to Britain to find a bunch of quote unquote so-called Jews, unless we're supposed to believe that all of the Britons, Anglo-Saxons, and the Germanic race are all quote unquote modern day Jews, which we know isn't true. So what it means is that the white race were the Israelites of the Bible. The Bible is the book of the white race, not the so-called Jews. So I'm going to read a few quotes from Germans who basically say the same exact thing that the English history says that I just read. So, and it seems that, any country you research, any white country you research, if you dig deep enough, you can find similar stories. They all claim the same origin, all the way back to the Middle East and that whole area. That's where the white race came from. And we migrated all over the world, everywhere. So William Brockman, who was a pastor in Germany prior to during World War II, said, I worked closely with the men from the Ananurbe who traced our Christian roots by tracing our bloodlines. They found evidence that shows Jews and Arabs were not the original people in the Holy Land. They found evidence of Aryans, white people, in India, China, and more importantly, Iran, Iraq, and the Middle East. This shows that Aryan Europeans were there first before migrating up into Europe. I am afraid much of their work has been stolen and put away so the world will not see it. With the creation of the state of Israel, they can now contort the truth. The Jews can contort the truth and hide important finds to mask the true descendants of the promises of God, claiming them as their own. And right, that's exactly what Alan Wilson and other people say, based on reading the Welsh and English history, that the Europeans migrated up into Europe and into Britain. And that is exactly what the Germans were finding as well when they were looking into it. Princess Maria Adelheid said, and she worked with the SS and Heinrich Himmler, she said, the belief of Reichsfuhrer SS Himmler and the Fuhrer Hitler was that the Christian religion came from Europeans by Europeans and to Europeans and no one else. So it came from, by, and to the white race. That is because the limited excavations of the Anunnaki and independent researches could do in the Middle East showed something. They showed that the ancient people who lived several thousand years ago in the regions we today call the Middle East were populated by fair skinned and eyed white people who migrated up into Europe from these areas. Again, we migrated into Europe. I know the Bible says there was dispersion due to war and conquest. We know the Sith and many other tribes were Aryan and not anywhere close to the dark skinned people who are in the land now. When one group left or was forced out, another came in. Due to this practice, all the white Aryan tribes migrated into Europe. You have to remember this was thousands of years ago. Whole nations changed races in that time. So, my note, that's critical to understanding everything. The people in the Middle East and North Africa and Turkey and India, those people are all mongrels. They are not the original people who lived there 2,000 years ago, maybe even 1,000 years ago. I'm not sure, but definitely 2,000 or more years ago. So they were white civilizations that lived there, blonde people, blue eyes. So way different than today. I think that's probably one of the key things that people have trouble understanding is that the racial aspect of the people in regions have changed over time. SS General Karl Wolfe said, the Anunnaki was in a roundabout way showing the area of Palestine, Persia, India, and parts of North Africa were concentrations of our people, white people. Our ancestors colonized wherever they settled, building great things. Only one race on earth has demonstrated the ability to do these things. So it would only make sense that if God created a special people, right, the chosen people, to be a light to the world, it would be people who had the ability to explore, heal, invent, and build. No other people has shown all these traits except for one, and on such a grand stage. I firmly believe the areas of the world now populated by darker skinned Arabs were, in fact, home to our people before many moved north into today's Europe. Again, we migrated out of the area, so into Europe. Fedor Kazan, who was a Ukrainian, stated, right? And again, this is just my point is that people all over the world understood this back in the day. And nowadays, you know, people don't understand anything apparently. But anyway, Fedor Kazan said, I want to tell you it is interesting that in the Bible, Edom means red, a people God hates. They usurped God's people's names, customs, etc., into kings, trying to become God's people by deception. And Gudrun Himmler said the Anunnaki was Gudrun Himmler is Heinrich Himmler's daughter. She said the Anunnaki was nothing but an archaeological research institute run by the SS. They went all over the world looking into the history of the Europeans and looking for evidence of the path the tribes took coming into Europe. They found evidence of European, who also can mostly be called Aryan, mummies in Tibet and China, Iran, all over what we call Persia or the Middle East. They tested Egyptian theories and found most all dynasties were European bloodlines, not African. Some went to South America looking for evidence of Europeans there as well as in America, which my note was found. So they believed Columbus was not the first European on the continent, which is definitely not true. And indeed, the Vikings may not have been the first either. There was evidence uncovered that tribes of Europeans were there thousands of years ago. And that you can go back to what Alan Wilson and Blackett and others discovered more recently. And then you go read the stuff they read, the ancient manuscripts that go back, 1,000 or 1,500 years ago that back up everything that they're saying. So I don't know. History is incredible when you actually dig deep.